So God designed sex for multiplication, adoration, and recreation. Begs the question then, what happened? What happened? Because when I look around, I see something that God created as a means of bringing forward life into this world that is instead taking life out of this world through things like sexually transmitted diseases and abortion. And when I look around, I see something created as an expression of love that's being wielded just to fulfill selfish desires. When I look around, I see something that was given for our pleasure that's instead just being used to fuel addiction and destruction. So what happened? I'll tell you what happened. We stepped beyond God's boundaries. Leads me to my second point this morning, that sin has led us beyond God's boundaries. See, just as important it is for us to understand that God created sex, we also need to understand that God constructed boundaries for it. Let me say that again. God created sex, but he also constructed boundaries for it. Again, we look back in the beginning, right? Back to Genesis chapter 2. God tells us a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to one wife, and they shall become one flesh. There it is. One man, one woman, under the covenant of marriage, becoming one flesh. These are the boundaries. The problem is, we don't like boundaries now, do we? Right? In our sinful, broken state, we find boundaries as restrictive. I don't know how many of you growing up had boundaries like in your neighborhood, but I remember as a kid, my parents were like, yeah, you can go with your siblings or with your friends or whatever. You can go outside, ride your bikes, do whatever you want, so long as you don't go past like that house or that street or that park. Anybody else have boundaries? Yep. And what was the first thing that you wanted to do when you got outside? Cross the boundaries. It's how we are wired. This is what sin does to us. Right, we see it all the way back in the Garden of Eden. Right, God gives Adam and Eve some boundaries, and what do they want to do? They want to redraw those boundaries. They want to redraw those boundaries, and they want to push the limits. And unfortunately, they got their wish, didn't they? Right, because when they ate of the fruit that God told them not to eat, they fell away from God, and they fell into sin. They even found themselves literally put outside of the boundaries of the garden. They chose to separate themselves from God, and in that moment, sin began to pollute and to destroy and to distort everything, including sex. Ever since that day, family, sin has been leading us beyond God's boundaries, especially when it comes to sex. And here's why this is important for us to understand. Here's why this is important. It's because sex is not the problem. Sex is not the problem. We are the problem. I think some of us need to come to terms with that reality here today. We wonder, why am I struggling so much with this? Well, it's not sex's fault. It's our fault. And it's time we stop passing the buck and own up to it. Because here's what I see a lot of in church. I'm just being real with you guys. I see a lot of blaming our overly sexualized culture. And it is overly sexualized. I'm not denying that fact, but we blame our overly sexualized culture. We blame this fact that we're somehow like desensitized to sex nowadays, as if Netflix is forcing us to watch their shows. I'm sorry, y'all, those excuses, they are simply excuses. Excuses that we find in order to give ourselves permission to go beyond God's boundaries. And I know it seems harmless, right? It's just a 30-minute show. It's just a few extra seconds on that Instagram reel. But each one of those moments are opportunities that are presented to us to lure us beyond God's boundaries. See, here's the thing. My parents, there was a reason why they gave me boundaries when I was little. Was it to hurt me? Was it to restrict me? No, it was for my own good. It's for my own good. I wasn't big enough or brave enough or smart enough or strong enough. Same goes for us now. We are not strong enough. We are not as strong as we think we are when it comes to this. If you don't believe me, I've got scripture, I've got science, I've got stories, I've got statistics that'll prove all of that. We simply are not strong enough to do this on our own. None of us are as strong as we think we are. So what happens when we put ourselves outside of God's boundaries, when we even go up to that line, we are putting ourselves in grave danger. So we need to understand that sex is not the problem, that we are the problem, which leaves us then with a problem. See, because we can run from a relationship. We can delete our social media accounts. We can even move out of state if that's what it means. But the reality is we can't ever escape ourselves. Family, what we need is to be rescued. What we need is to be rescued, and this is where the good news comes in, because that's exactly why Jesus came. It was to rescue us. See, we may have chosen to go beyond God's boundaries and to separate ourselves from him. But the good news of the gospel is that the God that we abandoned never abandoned us. The God we abandoned never abandoned us. In fact, he went to the point where he pursued us so much that he became like us in the person of Jesus Christ. Fully God and fully man, who died in our place to rescue us from ourselves and to restore us to right relationship with